So Sarah, we've gone through and we've completed your PAR Q and your PAR Med X. We also do have your physician's note saying that it is okay for you and I to move forward together with an exercise program, which is terrific. What I wanted to do today before we got underway with your exercise program is I just wanted to chat a little bit about your health history and maybe a little bit about your health future. So this is something I like to do with all of my clients. I like to talk to them specifically about risks for health conditions moving forward. So specifically heart disease, and I often talk to my clients about diabetes as well, just because these are two really, really common health conditions that we see in our society and also that I see in my client population as well. So what I wanted to talk to you about specifically was your coronary heart disease risk. Coronary heart disease is actually the #1 killer of both men and women in Canada on a yearly basis. The good news is that we often do have indicators of what might put us at a higher risk for a cardiovascular event, so like a heart attack or a stroke. And a lot of these risk factors are actually modifiable. They're things that we can have an impact on so that hopefully we can decrease our risk of heart disease and live longer and healthier lives. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about your heart disease risk profile, so your risk for heart disease moving forward. So I mentioned before that there are a number of risk factors that we can take a look at and see whether or not those risk factors do increase the likelihood that we might have or we might develop heart disease over time. Two of the risk factors that we can't change, that we have no influence over, are of course, one is age and the other is family history. So we know being a female, age 28, you're actually not currently at a high risk based on your age for heart disease. We know for women that typically that risk tends to increase over the age of 45. So again, we've got a long time before that's going to be a risk factor for us, right? For you and I. The other risk factor that we don't have much control over is family history. So you told me last week when we met that your father did pass away at age 52 of a heart attack. So what we do know is that when we do see a cardiovascular event like that, and when it does cause death before age 55 in a first-degree male relative, that does increase our risk of developing heart disease over time. So again, this is something that you have absolutely no control of, right? We just know that your family history indicates a background with heart disease. So all we do is put a check in the box and know that is a positive risk factor. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to develop heart disease. It just means that your risk is increased, right? The great news is that there are a number of lifestyle factors that can also increase your risk, but they are also things that we have control over. So even though you do have this non-controllable risk factor with your family history, there's a lot of really modifiable factors that you do have control of that we can have an impact on to keep your overall risk really low. So those are some of the things that hopefully you and I can address over the course of the next 3 months together. So again, when we went over your health history, we talked a little bit about cigarette smoking. So you told me that you quit smoking 3 years ago, which is absolutely fantastic. You should be very proud of that because it is a very difficult habit to break. So congratulations. The risk factor when we talk about heart disease is whether you're a current smoker or a recent smoker that's maybe quit within the last 6 months or less. So the great news is that having quit now for 3 years, we can actually take that out of the equation and not count that as a risk factor for you. So that's terrific news. So you've already taken steps to improve your health, your long-term health, by quitting smoking over time. And of course, smoking not only impacts heart disease, but it has a lot of impact on a lot of other health factors as well. So that's a great thing. Obesity is another risk factor. The great news is with the measurements that we have done already, your body mass index, your BMI, and your body fat percentages both put you well within the normal range. So again, we would classify you as average or normal and not in the obese category. So again, that's great news. We can again take that away as a current risk factor. One thing we do want to be really aware of, though, moving forward, you talked about how you've had a bit of a steady weight increase over the course of the last 6 years. If that's something that you and I can maybe modify now from this point moving forward by maybe taking a look at your exercise patterns, your activity patterns, and maybe taking a look at your nutritional patterns as well. If we can, keep those measurements within the healthy range, then again, that's going to put you at lower risk over time in terms of overweight and obesity. Right? Now, some of these factors that we, again, do have a lot of influence over, we talked last week about how you've not been maybe as active as you might like to have been over the course of the last 6 years since you began your job as a police officer. So a sedentary lifestyle is an impact factor for both heart disease and diabetes, as I mentioned before. So what we're looking to have people do is participate in at least 30 minutes of activity 3 times a week. Right? And you mentioned that right now you're not currently active in any physical activity. So again, that's part of what you and I can change together. That's something that we can definitely have an impact on in terms of getting you more active. Another lifestyle factor that we do have some control over is what we call hypertension or high blood pressure. So at your treadmill test that you did a couple of weeks back, they did take a resting blood pressure from you, and it measured a little high as we measured it at 140/82. So, the ideal perfect measured blood pressure is 120/80, right? And we've got a lot of wiggle room both on the high side and on the low side of that. When we start to get a little bit concerned with the higher number, what we call your systolic, is when we start to reach 140 or above, right? So we did measure your systolic blood pressure at 140, which is borderline. We really don't want it to climb much higher than that. The good news is that your diastolic, or the lower number, measured at 82, which again is right in the normal range. So that's not a concern at all. But to look at your overall blood pressure at measuring at 140 over 80, again, that's something that we just want to kind of keep an eye on over time. The great news is that your doctor didn't see that as being an issue that right now he feels like he needs to put you on any blood pressure medication. I think he's looking at maybe modifying your diet and your exercise program as being a way that perhaps we can actually have an influence on your blood pressure and actually bring that down. Because we do know that activity and a healthy diet can impact your blood pressure. Right? So that's the great news. So while we're a little kind of borderline high, this is something that you and I can work on moving forward by just getting you more active and maybe looking at your nutritional patterns. The other thing that would have to do with your diet as well is looking at your cholesterol and your HDL levels. So again, when we talk about maybe making some unhealthy food choices, so we talked last week a little bit about how often you're quite busy, so you'll pop the kids in the car and head out to McDonald's for a Happy Meal and so forth. What we do know about that is fast food generally tends to be high in fat, high in cholesterol. It also tends to be really high in sodium as well. And of course, high sodium can also impact hypertension. So we know that a diet lower in sodium can actually have a positive effect on high blood pressure. So looking at an unhealthy diet and these elevated cholesterol level and actually a lower HDL level, that combination and that ratio has actually given you kind of another risk factor when we look at your heart disease. Again, the great news is this is a modifiable factor. This is something that we can change, right? So again, when we talk a little bit in the future about how we can maybe make some changes to your diet, this is something that we can look at, right? Is reducing the fat, reducing the cholesterol, and reducing the sodium intake. And actually, these are things that are really modifiable and really easy to do. Prediabetes is also a risk factor for heart disease. We don't have any numbers from that. I didn't get that information from your physician, but that might just be something that you might want to follow up with next time you see him, just to maybe get a resting blood glucose level test, just so it's something that we can keep an eye on moving forward. Because again, if that is a risk factor, that is something that we can have an impact on, and certainly making better food choices and getting more physically active will have an impact on that in any case. So it's going to be a positive effect regardless. So those are your primary risk factors for heart disease. The other one that's not a primary risk factor but still is a risk is high levels of stress. So you and I have talked about how your lifestyle in your recent history, going through a divorce and raising 2 kids on your own, has been a challenge. And of course your job as a police officer is of course high stress as well. So again, engaging in more physical activity does wonders for reducing stress levels. And I'd love to talk to you maybe down the road of maybe to talk about incorporating maybe some meditation or maybe some mind-body activities if you enjoy yoga, or if you enjoy mind-body activities like going out for nature walks, something like that, engaging in a hobby that you enjoy. Those are also lifestyle modifications that we can make that can help decrease your stress level. So these are all things that we can talk about moving forward. Certainly, again, you and I have the ability to work together to decrease some of these risk factors just by doing some lifestyle modification. So again, getting you more active, keeping your weight within normal ranges, keeping blood pressure within normal ranges. Again, we can influence that by doing more activity and addressing your diet. Taking a look at maybe some of the unhealthy food choices. So again, this is something you and I can talk about, but we'll definitely look at doing some referral to a nutritionist or a dietitian so that he or she can give you a little bit more guidance about what you can do with your diet specifically. And then see if we can modify some of those stress factors as well. So over the course of the next 3 months, these are things that you and I will spend lots of time talking about and decrease your risk for chronic health conditions moving forward. Because again, we want you to live a long, healthy life. So Sarah, just one more thing I wanted to talk to you about regarding your health history before we move on. I just wanted to quickly discuss with you the results from your fitness test that you did a couple of weeks back. I'm sure your doctor probably went over your results with you, but I just wanted to review it with you again one more time, just to kind of clarify any points and maybe answer any questions that you might have. Looking at your results, it looks like the doctor recommended a modified Bruce treadmill test, which he likely did just because of the risk factors that you do have for heart disease. So again, this is a test that's safer to perform with individuals that have those risk factors. He took your resting heart rate and your resting blood pressure. So your resting blood pressure, again, did measure on the high side systolic, just borderline high. So again, that's something that we do want to keep an eye on over time. He also measured your resting heart rate, which came in at 75 beats per minute. And that's really important for us in terms of how we are going to set your target heart rate ranges when we put together your programming. Another number that's really important for that was your maximal heart rate. So at the end of stage 4, the test was terminated due to fatigue, right? And your maximum heart rate at that time was 190 beats per minute. So what that does is now we have your resting heart rate, we have your maximal heart rate, and we're able to use those two numbers to set up your target heart rate range when we're working to create a program for you. So that's the great thing about doing this type of test, is that we're not approximating those numbers. We have those numbers, and we can set your target heart rate ranges really accurately, which is great, because that can be really impactful and very specific to you. So that's great. Looking at how you progressed, what we do expect as the intensity increases over the course of the stages is that your systolic, or the high number of your blood pressure, continues to increase at a very progressive level, and that your diastolic, which is the lower number, actually either maintains or it might even actually decrease. So looking at your numbers, you progress perfectly, exactly how we would expect. Looking at your MET numbers, your metabolic equivalents, they also increased over time. Generally, the normal response of your systolic, or the high number of blood pressure, is approximately 7 to 10 millimeters mercury per MET. So again, if we look at these numbers, like if you take a look at these numbers, it actually works out. If we take a look at your systolic numbers and compare them to how your METs increased, you fall well within the normal ranges. So that's terrific news. You actually performed really well on the treadmill test. And again, for the test to be terminated because of fatigue, that's actually normal, because it is a maximal test where you have your maximal levels. And again, that's giving us great information in terms of what I can do for you in terms of your program design. Yeah, so do you have any questions about that at all? Terrific. So Sarah, what I wanted to talk to you about next is a little bit more about what your goals are. So when we met last week, you mentioned that one of your goals was to lose weight. You wanted to lose a little bit of weight. You also mentioned that you were feeling quite unfit, and you were looking at maybe increasing your fitness level. And you also mentioned too that there was a lot of kind of lifestyle factors that you had kind of going on that maybe you'd like to address. You were mentioning some of your nutritional choices and some of the issues that you have with stress management. So what I'd love to discuss with you is how to take these very broad goals and make them a little bit more specific, how to kind of clarify where we want to go with this. Because what we do know is that individuals that set up with really specific goals tend to be more successful. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the acronym SMART goals. What that means is that when we set up goals, we want to make sure that they're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, and they're time-bound, right? So the more we can adhere to that acronym, the more successful I think that we're going to be. So if we look at your first goal, the very first thing you mentioned to me is that you were looking to lose a little bit of weight, right? And that you've tried a number of diet programs and haven't had a lot of success. What I'd love to do is take that and kind of fit it into our SMART format. So I think specifically you mentioned to me that you were interested in losing 15 pounds, right? What we can do is take a look at that and see how we can clarify exactly what that means, right? So one of the things I like to do first is maybe set a timeline to it, because we need to make sure that the timeline is really realistic. So we don't necessarily want to set a goal that says, well, I want to lose 15 pounds in 2 weeks, because it's not overly realistic. What we want to do is maybe set out a longer timeline, right? Generally, what we like to recommend in terms of weight loss is about 1 pound a week, right? 1 pound, maybe up to 2 pounds a week. So to keep this really realistic, if we look at our timeline together of 3 months, I'd like to look at 12 weeks for us to look at 10 pounds in 12 weeks, and then maybe set a longer timeline to lose that additional 5 pounds after, right? So again, we can make our goal more specific by saying we would like to lose 10 pounds in 3 months, in 12 weeks, okay? Now, having said that, I'd like to kind of draw attention away from just looking at body weight, because I think that if you weighed 400 pounds, but you physically look the way you wanted to look, then your body weight wouldn't matter. So I think what a lot of people mean when they say body weight is they actually are looking to lose body fat. So realistically, if we're looking at a 10-pound weight loss, that might put us somewhere in the 4 to 5% body fat. So we know your estimated body fat is 28%. So what we can do over the course of the 3 months is set a goal of 23% body fat and see how we do with that. Right? The other thing I would love to do with you as well is take your circumference measurements. So maybe measure your waistline with a measuring tape and your hips and any other part of your body that you might be interested in keeping track of, and doing that at baseline and doing that maybe at the halfway mark, and then maybe doing it at the end of our 3 months. Right? Because again, it's a great way to kind of measure our progress that isn't solely based on the scale. So what do you think about that? Does that sound like it might be realistic? Clearly, these goals are relevant to you, or else you wouldn't have mentioned them, right? In terms of your weight loss and also in terms of reducing your risk for heart disease. While you are in the normal range for BMI and body fat, we do want to make sure that you do still stay within those normal weight ranges so that we can keep that risk down. So clearly, these are relevant goals. And I think our timeline is very realistic. I think these goals are attainable based on our timeline. So if we look at your second goal, you mentioned that you wanted to achieve the fitness level that you had when you entered into the police department 6 years ago. You mentioned specifically at that time that you were jogging for 30 minutes at least 3 times a week, which is terrific. If we look at that as a goal, that's something I think that we can look at close on our timeline. I might like to extend that out instead of maybe looking at 12 weeks, maybe looking at maybe 20 weeks. So maybe somewhere between the 16 and the 20 week mark, I think would be more realistic to achieve that specific goal. If you're looking at 30 continuous minutes 3 times a week, I think that I think we can look at 16 weeks as a realistic goal here, right? But again, in our time together, we can definitely monitor that by beginning with your walking program and eventually adding some jogging intervals to it, and then modify as we go. And we can either shorten or extend that timeline as need be. You mentioned last week that you were interested in maybe doing a 5K with a friend of yours in 6 months' time, and I think that's a terrific goal. So let's set that as maybe your long-term goal. So in 6 months, being able to jog a 5K. And a shorter timeline, again, looking at 16 weeks as the ability to do your 30 continuous minutes. The goal is measurable by duration and frequency. It's attainable, I think, based on the timeline. And again, a really relevant goal for you in terms of your health, fitness, and reduction of your heart disease risk. And lastly, Sarah, we talked a little bit about adjusting some of the lifestyle factors, some of the things that are going on that we might be able to make some adjustments to in order to influence your health long term. You mentioned last week that your job is quite stressful. Your life with the recent divorce is quite stressful. And you've also mentioned too that you've had some challenges in making some good nutritional choices in terms of either convenience or just knowing what to choose. So what I would love to do is set you up with an appointment with a nutritionist. And at the same time, I would love to provide you some support just because we will be meeting a couple times a week, and I'd love to follow up with you in between those meeting times as well. And I can hopefully maybe give you some support in some of these adjustments that we can make. In terms of your nutritional choices, there's a lot of things that we can address. But one of the best things that you can do and you can start on right now is just by starting to add breakfast into your regular routine. You mentioned that often it's just kind of one big meal a day, and that's sometimes it's because you don't have time or because maybe in an effort to reduce your body weight. What we do know is that those people that eat breakfast do have a better ability to maintain and lose weight over time. It also gives them better energy throughout the day. It also helps with their cognitive function as well. So that's one thing that I would love to get you to do. And we can start small if you like. The great thing about eating breakfast as well is that it's a terrific habit to get your kids into as well, so that they have higher energy levels and can produce well in school. So that's something that you guys can do and work on maybe as a family, and for their benefit as well, which is great. we can use like a food journal to track these sorts of things, or a checklist. Whereas, we have every day of the week and you ate breakfast, check mark. There's apps for everything, and I've got a list of apps that I can give you, and maybe there's some on there that might be really helpful for you. So that's something that we can use to monitor and measure our progress. Again, I'm setting a timeline for 12 weeks because that's the time that we're going to be spending together. But I think to reach this goal is very realistic on a shorter timeline, right? I think we just need to set it up in baby steps and progress slowly. And I think that this is something that we can really look to do. In addition to eating breakfast every day, I would love to maybe look at reducing the amount of times that you and your family are eating out, just because it's very difficult to make good food choices, right? When you're eating out, especially at fast food restaurants. So, I mean, if typically right now it's 3 times a week, I mean, we could take the first baby step to just say, well, can we drop it down to twice a week, right? Or can we take that third day that tends to be the day that we go and pick a different alternative, right? Or maybe we pack dinner, or maybe we go for a picnic, or maybe do some planning ahead, which can be really helpful as well. So that's my kind of advice in terms of setting up some nutritional habit goals, is to eat breakfast and see if we can't reduce the times per week that we're eating out. Again, I think these goals are very relevant to you in terms of looking to manage your heart disease risk and also to lose weight, right? So what do you think about that? Do you think that is going to be something that we can do? Do you have any feedback on the goals and kind of some of the suggestions I've made? Because again, this is something that you and I should work on together so that we can make sure it is appropriate and realistic and attainable for you. So I really want to have your input as well to make sure that this is going to be right for you and that you can be successful. Terrific. So Sarah, based on the conversations that we had last week and some of the information that we've shared together today, I've put down some ideas about what I think our first 4 weeks of training together are going to look like. And I'd just love to share that with you just so you have a bit of an idea of what things are going to look like moving forward. We've already discussed the walking program that we've put together, and this is going to address the cardio portion of your programming. You'll notice from the workout that I gave you a copy of, that we do want to start slowly and progress gradually. So you'll notice in terms of your frequency, duration, and intensity that we're going to start slow and increase over time as tolerated. So that's something that we'll check in with each week when you and I meet for our sessions together. And I would love for you just to keep in communication with me just through texts in terms of how you're doing with that walking program. And again, if you feel that we need to maybe progress more slowly, or if you feel you're ready to progress more quickly, that's something that we can adapt over time. In terms of our workout together, the great thing about working out of your home is that we can meet at your convenience, and we can make use of the equipment that we have here to work together with. Now, my focus in our first week together is the development of core stability and shoulder and hip stability and mobility. So what this will do for us is it'll actually set us up with a great foundation to move forward. Right? So whenever I talk about working on the core, a lot of times people think, well, abs, right? And almost everybody wants to work on their tummy, and that's great, and that's something that we're going to address as well. But what we want to do is set a really great foundation with strength and mobility through your core, which includes not only your abdominals, but also the muscles of your back. And it also includes the muscles of the shoulders and the hips as well. So I always talk about the core as including everything except for your arms, legs, and head. Right? So what we want to do is develop stability and mobility through these areas so that we've got a great foundation to move forward. It's going to put us at less risk for injury, and it's also going to enable us to improve performance over time. It's actually going to allow us to work out better, if that makes sense, harder if we want to. Right? And it opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of what we can do. So the great thing about that, developing stability and mobility, is going to keep us safe long term, reduce our risk of injury, but it's also going to start building the foundations for toning through the abdominal area, through the back area, through the hip area, and through the shoulder area as well. So that's something that we're going to get started with right off the bat. Right? When we meet together in week number 2, we're going to continue with that theme, but we're going to start to add in some movement patterns. So once we've got some great foundations built, that enables us to move well, right? So we'll be starting off with really functional movement patterns, things like bending and lifting, squatting, pushing, pulling, rotating, right? So these are movements that we do all day throughout our activities of daily living, right? And especially when you have kids or when you work in a job like you do, having the ability to move well can be really beneficial, because then we're again moving from a second foundation of strength and ability. Once we've built stability and mobility, we've built some good movement patterns, then we're going to start to add some resistance to what we're doing. So at home here, you've got a dumbbell set, you've got some tubing, you've got some stability balls, and these are all things that we can use in addition to just body weight exercises that can help us progress over time. Right? And we can do things as we continue to grow that become a little bit more functional to what you do during the day. So maybe a little more functional to playing and spending time with your kids. And then also maybe more functional to what you do at work as a police officer. Right? So that's something that we can address outside of the first month. So probably when we head into month number 2 and month number 3, we can look into some of those more functional actions. But kind of when we're into week 3 and week number 4, we're going to start to progress into what I like to call load training and start to add some resistance to the movement patterns that we're doing. Right? And that's going to start to develop strength. That's going to start to develop tone in the muscle. Right? Metabolically, we're going to become a little bit more active, and that's going to really increase our ability to control our weight maintenance. Right? So again, if we're looking to decrease body fat, if we're metabolically, our muscles are more active, that's going to help us do so. Right? So that's what's going to happen in week number 3 and week number 4. So week number 3, we're going to introduce some load, some resistance to what we're doing, and then in week 4, we're going to look at progressing that a little bit. As I mentioned before, as we enter into month number 2 and month number 3, we're going to start to look into some more functional movement patterns, so maybe some more integrated movements. So not just your arms, not just your legs, starting to bring movement patterns together, so your arms and legs are working together in movement patterns. And I'd maybe love to take a look at maybe doing some circuit work with you as well, because again, that gets you burning fat, it gets you burning calories, it gets you building muscle. It's fun to do, and time goes by really, really quickly. It's really time effective, and that's something that can be really useful given your schedule moving forward. So if we can put together exercise programs that are really time effective for you, from the 3-month mark and beyond, maybe that's something that'll really work for you over the long term, because I don't want this just to be 3 months for you. I want you to exercise forever. So that's something that we're going to discover together over the next 3 months as well, is how can we do that? How can we set up an exercise program and progressions that are going to increase your health, reduce your risk of heart disease, maintain your weight, decrease your stress levels, and be something that you want to maintain forever, right? So I'd love your feedback as we move through the program. Please let me know your thoughts, and we will tweak as we go, just so that we can address any challenges we might have, and make sure that we reach our successes that we've set up with our SMART goals.